Morning guys, not sure who all is gonna tune into this. For those of you who requested, I am going to film a mobility tutorial right now, mobility and stretching, and I'm also just gonna talk about in general some of the fundamental things that you should know about the human body, human anatomy. So I've heard lots of you complaining about like clicking, popping in the shoulders, and I'm gonna give you guys some tips and tricks on things that you can do completely on your own. Properly mobilize yourself before you do any of those exercises involving your hips or your shoulders, where mobility and stability are key. So I'm going to start talking about the holy grail of exercises, the squat, since that is a super popular and effective exercise. However, if you are squatting improperly, you're going to start experiencing pain in multiple places. So I'm just going to talk about how you can assess the position that you're currently squatting in, and if you just might need to tweak your stance a little bit. Because what happens is if you're squatting improperly, your pelvis is dropping down in between your knees, or it should be. And if there's not enough room based on your leg stance, all of the insertion points of the muscles of like your quadriceps, all the ligaments, all the tendons in there are going to start getting pinched in between the head of your femur and your hip socket. So when I squat, this is my position here. Okay, you can see how far down I am to the floor. My knees are out to the side, my back is straight. Chest is up and open, and if you'll see, it's kind of like a very primal stance. My toes are flared out to the side, and most importantly, my knees are externally rotated, meaning that when I squat, my knees aren't coming in like this. Okay, and this is the stance that I see a lot of girls trying to squat in, is where they just have toes pointed forward, which is like the regular cueing, is toes forward, squatting down with your butt back like this. If I do this, I get shearing pains in the front of my hip flexors, and I can't get down very far. See? So if I'm in this position, this is as far down as I can get. If I'm in this position, suddenly I'm here. All right? And this is where you should comfortably be able to squat. So in order to find your specific and unique positioning for where you should be squatting, the easiest thing to do to see where you should have your hips when you're squatting is to simply do a drill, a variation of child's pose. Okay, so when we come down into child's pose, it's this position here. I'll do it both ways so we can see it. Okay, arms extended, bent down over our hips. Now you'll notice when I have my knees together here, I can't get my hips down very far. When I was just talking about squatting with my knees and toes pointed forward, same thing happened. I couldn't get down very far. But suddenly now if I open my hips to my squat stance in child pose, look at how much further down I can get my pelvis, all right? So if you just take a minute and squat down into this pose and toy around with knee positioning and see where you can get the most flexion in your pelvis, that's generally the stance that your squat is going to wind up in. Then from there, once you've found the width that works best for you, like right here, I've got lots of movement, I feel nice and open, nothing's like pinching or hinging or anything, you're just going to roll back up onto your toes. They should naturally come out, and look at that, I've reset perfectly into my squatting position. So here I am, okay? So that's all you need to do to find your squat. And now everyone's squat is gonna be a little bit different. No one has exactly the same structure of pelvis. We're all different. So when you find your toe flare, and by that I just mean where your toes are pointed out a little bit, and they're not like completely out to the side like you're a ballerina, okay? Because nobody is gonna be squatting in a plie like this. Once you've found just that slight external rotation, you need to think about engaging your glute muscles at that point, our butts. in layman's terms, are the big muscle group that keeps our hips externally rotated out to the side, okay? So when you're squatting, if your hips are falling in, meaning like right now my hips are externally rotated because I'm squeezing my butt cheeks together. If I drop them, do you see how my legs fall inward? And then I try to squat. That's where we get that knee wobble. That's where we get all the pinching into the front of the femur. So, step one, find the position that you should actually be squatting from. The second thing we need to talk about in terms of the squat is not simply finding your correct stance, but being mobile enough to actually get there. But this has a lot to do with the fact that the 21st century lifestyle has us all sitting in chairs all day long. It's not good for your pelvis to constantly be bent into an L shape, right? So if my finger is my torso and pretend I'm sitting in a chair and these are my legs, right in that crease of my thumb and my forefinger, this is your hip. So things are just getting pinched there all the time. Also, hello to that little guy. So before you go down in a squat, like if you squat and your hips are tight like that, when squatting is making your hip go like this, and you've already been sitting in a pinched position all day, you're just gonna end up making those symptoms worse. And you're gonna have muscles start overcompensating, like your quads. Your quads will end up getting super tight to try to force you down into a deep squatting position. You can't squat properly if your femurs have nowhere to move inside of the hip socket, right? What this drill is gonna do is gonna push pressure inside of that joint capsule and start expanding that space and allowing fluid to return to the area. It's gonna feel like a little bit of a glute stretch, but it's actually more so opening up the joint than anything else, if that makes sense. So this stretch is super, super vital to maintaining proper mobility and function in your hip sockets, all right? And this is coming from someone, I literally fixed my hip problems that I was having chronically for 2.5 years just by doing this exercise, okay? So here it is. You are just going to come, and I'm actually gonna, because this floor is wood, I'm gonna put a sweatshirt under my knee. So first things first is you're just gonna square yourself up, all right? So I've got knees under hips, wrists and elbows under my shoulders, all right? So I don't want you out here, I want you here. We're gonna start, it's gonna be my right hip. We're gonna bring that knee to our midline, all right? So just going from hip width, centered, and then you're just gonna rotate that knee up 90 degrees as far as you can, all right? And lock it in place. If you can see what I did with my other knee here, I just brought my knee, my left knee to my right ankle and locked her up there, okay? So I can hold this 90-degree position. Now once you've got there, you are just gonna sink your butt back. This is working well. You're gonna sink your butt back as far as you can by applying pressure through your femur into the butt. And you are aiming like you're trying to push your femur, the head of the bone in your leg here, out the back side of your butt, all right? So all the pressure should be coming from you leaning backwards into your hips, not from pushing yourself back with your upper body. So then as soon as that starts to release a little bit, then you can walk your hands forward as you're creating more space. But most people are gonna start about here. So you're gonna think that you're applying like a scooping motion into your butt. So if you look at me, like when I engage, like right now I'm not doing it, right now I am. So do you notice that little like scoop I do with the back of my leg? And you should feel pressure starting to expand straight down the inside of your butt cheek and out towards the back of the hip capsule right here. All right, so look at my butt, pressure here, pressure here. That's where you are trying to apply that force. And honestly, for a lot of people, this is gonna be the only mobilization that you need to do for your hips before you squat. A lot of the times, we cause a myriad of problems for ourselves, thinking that it's like a huge multifaceted issue, and it's really just like tweaking one or two small things. So now we're gonna move into talking about the quads, getting pain here on the outside of the hip, people who are having issues with their calves. So first, stretch I'm going to teach you. This is gonna stretch all of the deep muscles of the glutes. So especially after like a squat or deadlift day, this is something you should be doing. And anytime that we're performing any type of stretching movement, whether we're touching our toes or doing a cross body stretch, you always want to practice having an open and upright torso. So if you'll notice here, posturally, my chest isn't collapsed over on itself. A lot of people have a tendency to round their spine like this whenever they're reaching for a stretch, which is what you don't want to do, because then your vertebrae are elongating to make the reach happen, rather than forcing the muscle group that you're trying to stretch have to lengthen to go through that range of motion, if that makes sense. When you're sitting in the chair, you're gonna scoot right up to the edge of it. Nice, tall back, open torso, starting with one foot over the opposite knee. And then from here, I'll move my arm so you can see, you're just gonna lean forward over the front of your leg. Obviously only coming down as far as your flexibility will allow. If you're really, really tight, you could get here and feel something, okay? So I always tell people to do this stretch like they're kind of on a clock, 11, 12, 1. So straight ahead is gonna be chest over your shin, chest over your toe, chest over your knee. So you'll notice as you go through this progression, it's just gonna force the stretch into a different area of the glutes each time. And you wanna make sure, like I'm doing here, that we're leaning forward from the hips. So you wanna fold at the torso and not crumple yourself over like this, all right? So nice and tall, bend at the hip. And then spending equal amounts of time on each leg. You can also perform this lying down, in which case that would look like this here. All right, so same positioning. Now we're just on the floor. And the further back you're able to pull your leg, the further that is going to get deep into the back side of your glutes. After that, we're going to move into talking about the quads. Your quads are a very large muscle group. They're actually made up of 4 separate muscles. That's why they're called the quadriceps. All right. So this here is going to be a pretty intense stretch. So you're going to need either like a small pillow. I generally just have a sweatshirt that I throw underneath my knee for this. What you're going to do is get yourself set up against a wall. So you're going to start with one leg back against the wall. So right now I've got my knee at right in the corner where the wall meets the floor, and my shin is completely flat against the wall. Okay, so you don't want yourself pulled forward here. You want yourself completely pressed up against the wall. All right, then once you're in this position, you can bring the other leg around slowly, and many of you will probably already feel an adequate stretch in your quad just from being right here. All right, but depending on your level of flexibility, ease your way up. All right, don't just force yourself to stand up, okay? Give yourself a little bit of a progression of letting the muscle release itself and then coming up further. And always remembering, notice how my torso is upright. I'm elongated in the spine. I'm not like collapsed over myself, all right? Then you can rotate over the opposite knee, which is gonna push that deeper into the middle of your quad rather than the outside. Go ahead and switch sides. And when you are stretching, it doesn't matter whether if you're having an issue, like say your right quad has really been bugging you. Even if you're stretching your right quad because it has a specific issue, you should also be stretching the opposite side of your body, okay? Because our goal here is to keep optimal and equal function on both sides of the body, right? So just because it doesn't have a problem doesn't mean it won't develop one. So you want to be performing maintenance equally for obvious reasons, all right? So that is the quadricep stretch that I would recommend. If you want to get really creative with it, toy around with kind of turning the toe out and dropping your hips down in between. That's going to drive that further into the hip flexor. And you can just play with your pelvic positioning to stretch deeper into the inner portion of the thighs. All you need in life is a lacrosse ball. And I'm going to put a link on Amazon. You can get a massage ball. It's the same thing. It's just like a decently hard, spherical tennis ball sized thing. So I recommend that everyone has their own lacrosse ball because these things have endless uses. The first thing I want to teach you guys though is something for the hips. So this sucker is just going to go underneath a butt cheek at a time. You're going to put the foot of whatever hip or glute you are currently working on the opposite leg to keep your weight shifted over onto that side. And then you are just going to gently roll around and apply pressure to all of the little knots and pockets of tightness that you find in there. Okay, so you want this ball to reach the top of the glute here on the glute medius. This is a part of the glute structure that does not get a lot of love, and it needs to. You get super, super, super tight in the tops of your hips, and it's very difficult to stretch. So you can perform the same type of maintenance on it through applying pressure rather than trying to lengthen the muscle. So don't be afraid, ooh, someone loves me, to really get your body weight over top of it. And notice how I'm rolling it around more so on the outside of my hip than just like straight on my glute here. You can get there if you need to, but use the lacrosse ball to get to those like really, really difficult to reach places. And like I said, do that on both sides. We're also going to use this guy to target our quads and our hip flexors. So you are literally just going to lay on top of it. I'll turn this way so you can see what I'm doing. Under here, right on top of the quad, and rolling around and letting all those areas of tightness work themselves out. All right, so very, very gently rolling yourself back and forth because this is gonna get really intense really, really quickly. I'm not gonna lie to you, this is not fun. However, the more you do it, the less painful it's going to be, because if my muscle is nice and loose and soft and supple, it's not going to respond poorly to having pressure applied to it. What causes the pain is the fact that you have a ton of muscle fibers that have gone through repeated tearing and repairing and now have rebuilt themselves like a chunk of scar tissue, and you need to break up all of those adhesions in there. So yeah, that's gonna suck, but once you've broken them up, it's gonna get better. So the pain is necessary, but at the end of the day, you're gonna feel a million times better. Next thing you need to do, especially for people who are experiencing pain in the outside of the hip, a lot of times this has to do with tight IT bands. So let me talk really quickly about what exactly the IT band is. It is the biggest ligament in your entire body, and it stretches from the hip down to the outside of the knee, all right? This guy does not stretch because it's not a muscle, it's a ligament. And yes, while they have a little bit of give in them, they're not going to like flex and contract the same way that a muscle does. So when you are working with your IT band, you do need to be very, very careful with it. Yeah, you need to approach it like you're trying to like condition leather, kneading it rather than stretching it to restore that suppleness to it, okay? And your IT band is affecting your quadriceps and your hamstrings. It basically controls a large portion of the function in your leg. Anytime you're doing any type of movement here, the IT band is involved. Anytime that you're extending a hip or knee, IT band is working. So, 2 things I'm going to show you today. The one is just going to be rolling on the lacrosse ball, which I have lost. Here we go. I would recommend doing this with a foam roller, not a lacrosse ball. If you have a lacrosse ball, just very, very, very gently apply pressure to it, okay? Because your IT band is really, really, really delicate. So you are gonna start like mid-thigh is generally where it starts to get a little spicy. And then just spend some time rolling back and forth on the outside here and up into your hip as far as you can. Second best way to stretch this is to simply get yourself set up in a doorway. All you need to do is get yourself in a doorway for support, and then you are simply going to cross one leg over the other and kick the hip out. Okay, so right now I am trying to stretch my IT band on the right side. I'm in a doorway and I'm just like plieing almost out to the side here. Okay, so you see how my leg is rounding to the outside? And to reverse it, you just go the other way. And I'm just hanging onto the door frame to make sure that I don't fall down. When you are experiencing the pressure in your leg, it is forced directly on the outside, okay? Like right down that big strip on the outside of your leg. And what next? Calves. Everybody has tight calves. Easiest thing you can do for stretching your calves is up against a wall here. You're just gonna take a step forward, put a heel on the floor, toe up against the wall, my leg is completely straight, and then you just lean into it, all right? So if you watch what I'm doing, I just went from here where the pressure of my body was not on my calf, and then I just come forward into the wall. My foot and my heel and toe stay flexed against the wall, and then I just walk myself closer to whatever I have myself braced against. It's gonna force the back of the leg to lengthen, okay? And you can do that on the other side as well. Heel to the ground, toes up, and forward. And you're wanting to keep your leg completely straight. So minimize the length or the bend in the knee, and then just gently press yourself into the wall. Sometimes it can be kind of difficult to foam roll the calves, just because it's kind of like an awkward muscle group to get to. The best way I found to do it is to just put this on a little bit of an elevated surface. That way you can get the weight of your body completely over top of it and just go to town there. Something I do want to say really quickly while I'm thinking about it is the whole thing with stretching and warming up in general. There's always that conversation about sorry, God, I can't breathe. Well, working out at this altitude is gonna be super fun tomorrow. Anyways, there's always the discussion going on about like, do I stretch before? Do I stretch after exercising? Before you exercise, the main goal is to prepare your central nervous system and to prepare your muscles to do work, okay? So stretching is more of a recovery aspect of fitness, meaning it needs to come afterwards. Now, you're probably familiar with the term dynamic stretching, and whenever I warm up before I train or before I have a session with a client, what I have them go through is a series of dynamic stretches, okay? So it's getting the body moving. You're not gonna wanna just sit in a still position with a leg outstretched when the next thing you're gonna try to do is do squats, which are gonna have you moving, gonna have you pushing weight, and it's gonna make your joints go through full range of motion and whatnot. So you're trying to raise your core temperature because you need to get blood flowing more rapidly than it already is, and going to all of the muscle groups that are about to be called upon to do a job. All right, so when you are going to the gym to do an exercise, I recommend 3 to 5 minutes of cardio at a pace where you're trying to get your heart rate and your breathing up a little bit, and then going through a series of dynamic stretches. And I will make, that's a lot to go through. I can make another video about that if y'all would be interested. So yeah, and then the point of stretching, like the stretches we were just doing, is after you have performed exercise, you need to make sure that when the muscles are healing and repairing themselves, that they're doing so in their natural elongated state, right? Like we have all experienced like doing deadlifts and the next day your hamstrings are like insanely tight. Well, that's because if you don't stretch properly after you've literally traumatized your muscles, and your muscles are like in the fetal position, like what just happened to me? You need to stretch them so that when they're repairing themselves in an open, elongated position, okay? So when you are gonna stretch, when you are gonna do foam rolling and whatnot, that is best to do afterwards. I do incorporate stuff with a lacrosse ball beforehand. I have really bad knots in my back all the time, and sometimes I'll work out the knots in my back before I do anything involving overhead pressing or whatnot, because those knots in between my shoulder blades get in the way of my range of motion. But generally speaking, dynamic warm-up, meaning like lunges and butt kicks and high knees and stuff, windmills with your arms, stuff that is making the body actively move, needs to come before you do a training session, and then the more slowed down holding a position stretch can come after the session, after you have also done like a 3 to 5 minute cool down where you let your body temperature come back down. So just like walking on a treadmill, let the body temperature come back down, let your heart rate come back down to normal, and then 5 to 10 minutes of stretching. Make sense to everybody? Okay, let's move on. All right, we're having fun. Now I'm going to move into talking about the upper body, namely the shoulders, and that's probably all I'm going to be able to get to today, because this is already going to be a really in-depth one. Okay, because your shoulder is an extremely complicated structure. It's the most mobile joint in the body, meaning like your elbow can only do this. It's not a super mobile joint. Your shoulder, on the other hand, can do this. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. And in order for that structure to be able to do so many different types of movement also means that it is naturally the most unstable joint in the body. And that makes sense, right? Like if you're trying to make something strong, it's going to be very, very braced, and there's not going to be a lot of movement involved. It's very, very easy to start accumulating problems all up in here just based off of poor positioning in the training movements that you're doing. Most commonly, this happens with overhead movements and with movements to the front. External rotation in the shoulder joint, which is the proper position, if you'll remember me talking about this in your hips as well, is making sure that when my arm is here, that I'm rotated outside, right? So I'm not letting everything fall to the inside. I'm opened and externally rotated. What that is doing is activating all of those muscles on my scapula. I'm gonna try to use a mirror here so you can see me talking to the back of my head. So all of these muscles here on the back of your scapula are working together to keep you pinned back and open when you are performing overhead or pressing movements, to keep the AC joint up here at the top and the little itty bitty baby muscles of your anterior deltoid from taking over those movements, which is when you start to get like a sharp shooting pinching sensation here, pain, grinding, popping up here. So these problems are multifaceted. One is poor form, two is weakness in the rotator cuff, all right? So first I'm gonna show you how to properly set up for a pressing or pushing movement, and also how to strengthen those rotator cuff muscles. It's something that you need to intentionally be working into your training to make sure is strong, because those little tiny stabilizer muscles of the rotator cuff will not combat the force of the larger, stronger muscle groups. So you have to really, really intentionally strengthen them, otherwise they're gonna get easily overpowered, especially if you have poor form. I'm gonna do this in a chair so that you guys can see where I'm at here. First things first, we always want to make sure that regardless of whether we're squatting or doing whatever, that we always have ourselves braced at the core. Okay, that doesn't just mean like sucking your stomach in, because anybody can sit here and go like this with their stomach all day long. To brace your core is to literally prepare like you're about to get punched in the gut, okay? So that should be like a, but I can still breathe once I get there. I'm just nice and locked in, so there's not going to be any weird shearing forces getting put on my spine. And also, whenever we're performing movements that have us working on the sides of our body, that is still attached to our torso. So the more stable we are here, the more stable we are when we're translating the motion further outside of our trunk, right? So with a pressing movement, it's important to realize that you can still press up and overhead and be open at the chest, okay? Because a lot of people have a tendency to collapse forward like this and press with a dumbbell in front of them here. No, you need to be open to the side, all right? And you do that by squeezing your shoulder blades together, okay? So we're not just like flinging our arms behind us, because I can put my arms back here and not have my back tighten at all. You want to do kind of that, like, I always think of it as like you're gonna step out into a bodybuilding competition where they do like that thing with they wing their lats out, and take intentional time to pin everything down on the sides, squeeze your shoulder blades together, like flex your back as strong as you can. And you're gonna keep that tightness all the way through either the pressing or the pulling or the pressing motions here, all right? Because contrary or paradoxically, you can bring things across your chest and through your chest without your chest collapsing on itself, okay? So this is collapsed, this is open. So anytime that you're collapsing on your chest, you're pinching a bunch of stuff in the joints right here. There's a ton of ligaments. I won't go into the exact structure because it's really confusing. There's so many things overlapping inside of the shoulder joint. Like literally just get on Google Images and look at a picture of the anatomical structure of the shoulder joint. It's ridiculous. All of those things have to not only be working in unison, but there has to be enough space in there for everything to slip and slide past each other. So when you're getting clicking in your shoulders, generally that's because you don't have something properly aligned. And now the head of your humerus, your arm, where it articulates at the shoulder joint, where it fits into the shoulder capsule up here, is grinding against all the little layers of ligaments and smaller bones like your clavicle and whatnot at the top. So to combat that, you're always going to make sure is not only that you are pulled back in the shoulders to activate the stabilizing muscles of the rotator cuff, but make sure that your arms are externally rotated. So I see lots of people all the time still pressing with allowing the head of their humerus to fall forward here. So notice how I'm open in my chest. I'm pulled back, stabilized at the core, but my arm is just like flopped in like this. And now I'm trying to press from here. Well, now I'm gonna pinch everything all up in here, up at the AC joint. So I need to externally rotate my arm. Generally speaking, when you're externally rotated in all positions, your body is gonna come into this nice active, like, prepared stance here. All right? So everywhere I'm externally rotated, in my hips, in my knees, if you could see my ankles, I'm a little bit toe flared right now. Shoulders, elbows. And this is the body's most stable and supported and ready for action stance. So next time you're doing a pressing motion, make sure you're starting with the dumbbell braced to the outside of your body. You also want to make sure that this elbow isn't flaring out to the side, otherwise that dumbbell path is going to have to go forward, around, and back in order to complete that range of motion, when what you want to be able to do is just straight up overhead, okay? It's a much more efficient press. So think like you're trying to drive the press out of your back, not out of your shoulder. It's going to engage all of the stabilizing muscles in your scapula. It's going to cause your rear delts and your lats to help stabilize everything in the back as well, without forcing everything forward onto your little anterior delt here and causing a myriad of problems for yourself. Same thing whenever you're doing either bench press, like pressing here, or flies or anything, you need to keep your chest open and squeezing your back muscles together as hard as you possibly can, which if you're realizing already is something that you really struggle with. Lay off of chest movements for a while and just focus on strengthening your back, strengthening your rotator cuff. So rotator cuff exercises would be bent over flies, coming here to the side, anything that is going to force you to pin those scapulas down. And again, you'll notice I'm doing that movement with my chest up. So even when my arms are coming around and forward like I'm hugging a barrel, I'm not collapsed over. All right, I'm open the entire time. So think like you have a bar from here to here that will not let you, do you see how this stays open the whole time? That will not let you collapse in, all right? Keep that space. Another thing that causes people a lot of problems a lot of the time is their lats are so tight that it's difficult to extend the arm overhead. This is a combination of tight lats, the big dudes on the side, and also tight triceps. Stretching your lats, easiest thing to do is position yourself up against a wall or a doorway. Extend, starting with the open chest, tight back. Anytime you're doing anything, open chest, tight back. And pressing into an arm, all right? Deeper you can get into it, deeper it's going to stretch on the side, spending equal time on each arm. And then to move it into the triceps, you're just going to bend an arm, elbow to the wall, and now I'm to the side, stretching here. Feel free to get a lacrosse ball and get it on all those muscles as well, and roll around on that as well, up against a wall. If you're feeling, you know, like you just haven't experienced enough pain in your life on any given day, just do this and hang out for a little bit. And don't forget to breathe. It'll be a ton of fun, I swear. It's gonna be great. You're gonna love it. Okay guys, well that is all for now. Let me know what you thought of the video. I'm sure this is not the last one of these that I will ever make. So if there's anything else that you want me to touch on that I didn't cover, or things that I didn't explain well, sorry that I was doing this in the bedroom of an Airbnb. I will probably revisit some things at some point when I'm back home at my gym, where I have resistance bands and whatnot, and I can show you even more ways to target those muscle groups that I just talked about. So if you need me or want me to talk about anything else in the future specifically, comment below. I'll try to make a mental note of it, and let me know what you thought in general. Hope this helps. Thanks for watching.